Oh, hello, hello. Welcome. Cool. So, hi, welcome to the Three.js workshop. We're just going to wait a couple minutes before getting started, just like as people kind of trickle in. I really wish I could see the chat right now. Maybe I should pull that up real quick. But yes, I hope everybody's having a great day, a great evening, I think. Yeah. Cool. Okay, we can get started. So hello and welcome to Speedy 3D, which is my React and Three.js workshop. So I will get into an intro before going to the actual workshop. So here's a table of contents of everything that we'll be going through with my funky little flower drawing up top. So we're just going to start off with like a welcome, and then we're going to go into an introduction. And then because I feel like it's a very visual thing to learn, we're going to be going into a live setup. And then we're going to be creating shapes, adding movement, and then some extra things, leaving you guys with some tips and do's and don'ts and stuff like that. And yeah, so that will be the general structure of what this workshop is. And you can also find more about this in the hack pack, where you can find some of my favorite examples and different resources too. So just so that it's all there for you in one place. So hello, I guess I will introduce myself. I'm Anson. I'm going to my second year at the University of Waterloo studying systems design engineering. Don't ask me what we do. We don't know either. But yeah, it's like a general engineering that pulls together a bunch of different disciplines. But as of right now, I have had my last few co-ops in software. So this one specifically that's upcoming that I'm in right now is at a place called Jam 3. And they do some really interesting like AR, VR, digital experiences, stuff like that for a lot of brands that you may know, like Adidas. They did the digital version of Complexland, and they did a lot of really interesting experiments with journalists as well. So I was thinking, oh, okay, leading up to my job, like I might as well learn Three.js. So this presentation is basically me presented to you the things that I learned basically in the way that I learned it, which is very hands-on and very much like let's learn through kind of brute force doing it rather than just like reading a whole bunch of documentation and then hopefully having it translate over into practical use cases. So a little bit more about me. I beekeep on the side because I grew up on a blueberry farm. I like to read, and I'm a very notorious documenter. So I've journaled for like basically this entire year, and I'm always the one to like take photos and like videos and stuff like that. So like very big on documentation. But yeah, aside from that, we can get started. Yay, exciting. Okay, cool. So you guys might be wondering, what the heck is this Three.js thing? So before we want to go into that, we want to go over a concept called WebGL. So that stands for Web Graphics Library. So what this essentially does, it's a program on the computer that can draw three things: dots, lines, and triangles. Crazy, right? Yeah, it doesn't sound that impressive right off the bat, but it's really capable of some ridiculous things. Like I think a lot of the games that people play, whether it be like Firewatch or like other video games and stuff like that. Yeah, my repertoire is like a little bit lacking, as you can tell. But that's created using graphics libraries as well. So this one is just specifically for webs and websites, and it's done. So, and but the thing that people found is that every time you want to make a sphere, or you want to make like a dodecahedron or something interesting, you kind of have to find very interesting and creative ways to cobble together a whole bunch of dots, lines, and triangles to create a cohesive product that somebody can interact with. And that turns into like a lot of numbers and a lot of code and a lot of numbers and a lot of code. So what is the solution to this? People saw that there were commonly used functions that were used consistently when people were using WebGL. So they created an abstraction on top of that called Three.js that allows people to basically make 3D objects and to draw things with the computer in a very easy and compact way. And another good thing about Three.js is that it's a package that works in tandem with JavaScript. So because of that, and because of the web like mostly being run with JavaScript as well. You're able to use this to make web games, and it's very easy to make like interactive sites. So if you've ever seen like 3D personal profiles or like different like examples when you're shopping online where you're able to see 3D models, that's typically or very likely done using Three.js. So just to give some context of like the things that Three.js is capable of so that you guys have an understanding going into things, I'm going to show you a few of my favorite examples. They're also included in the hack pack, but I wanted to like give a quick walkthrough of them before we go into things. So here is the list that I compiled. I'm slowly going to be adding more as I go throughout, but I wanted to identify some of my favorites and show you guys today. So this one's super fun. This one, I think it was like the one that I saw and I was like, how is this possible on a website? And basically you're able to use your keys to just like navigate this car. And it has like a full physics engine and has like 3D objects as well. So this is done doing Three.js. And Bruno Simon, he also created a course for Three.js. So if after this workshop you feel so inclined to explore a little bit more and see how you could possibly make something like this, that then you can like feel free to just like explore his course as well, because I think it's one of the most comprehensive ones online. Then also this one I think is really cool because of the way that they use interaction. So you can drag this and then it takes you through this entire thing. And this 3D model is probably created in Blender or some other 3D model editor, but the way that they developed it so that you as a user can interact with it on the web, this is where Three.js comes in, which I think is pretty cool. And then there's this one, it's attached to a scroll. So you scroll down and then this gigantic rock thing spins and then it falls apart. And then you can do it over and over again and just play around with it. And it's really fun. So it's stuff like this that just like really elevates all the creations that you're able to make. And if you have everybody and their literal mothers making a 2D portfolio, if yours is able to be 3D, imagine the person approaching it or like viewing your website. Like I feel like I would be very wowed if that's the case. So yeah. This one's paper planes. It's really fun to play on mobile. You can go and try to use your phone to catch the actual paper planes. So I would highly recommend for you to like check this one out as well. I think my friend Kelly showed this to me, so shout out to Kelly if she's watching. But yeah, cool. So that's a couple of the examples. And I wanted to quickly go over the thing that we're going to be making today. So this is the starter code that I'll be sending in the chat so that people are able to use it. Because I find that like getting set up with like npm packages and stuff can sometimes be the most cumbersome part of workshops. So just even if you can't get it, let's try to get it set up on your local machines. But if you can't, here's the starter code. It's a code sandbox. I think Leon's going to be sending it now for me. Thank you, Leon. And yeah, but the thing that we'll be actually making today are these two spinning cubes. Crazy, right? But aside from that, there's more to it than what meets the eye. Once you actually hover over the cubes, it gets bigger, and it changes color. And then you also have a sky with a sun at the very top. You have a floor, and you have the full orbit control, so you can spin around these cubes. So it's really fun to play with. I'll also send this in the chat as well, so that you guys are able to have the final code as a reference just in case, and then you guys are able to follow along. But before we get into like actually creating and like coding up things, because we could like totally jump into things. I think something to emphasize that I like came to realize over learning it was that the tools will change very often, but the things that stay the same are like 3D 3D modeling fundamentals, like lights, like shaders, like materials, like meshes. So it's like, it's those things that I'm going to try to convey to you so that those, regardless of what tools that you use, regardless of whether you use Three.js or maybe like a different graphics engine, you understand the fundamentals. So then you're able to pick up skills really easily. So I guess we can kind of get into the code of things. So that brings us to, I guess, like my conceptualization. Oh my goodness, my drawings are like worse than I thought on second thought, but please bear with me. But basically, Three.js, the way that I can imagine it, and the way that I hope to explain it, is that you have a scene that is going on. Think of yourself as think of Three.js as like filming a ballet, for example. So you basically have a stage, otherwise known as a canvas, where the scene is going to be happening, where dancers are going to be dancing. And then you have the dancers there as objects, or you have props there on the stage as objects. And then you have light shining on these objects so you're able to see it. So if there's no light, it doesn't matter what's happening on the stage. You won't be able to see it. And because so then that's like what's happening on the actual stage. But in addition to that, you also need a camera to be seeing what is happening. So that's like the camera that is recording what is happening on the stage. I use the example of recording because with Three.js, within a given second, it will take a whole bunch of snapshots and then it will like upload it to the computer or upload it to the DOM where the computer is able to show it to the user. So like maybe in a second, it re-renders like 60 different times. So say if you want to do movement, you can kind of do it in like a stop motion type of way where you make slight movements every single time it re-renders, but to the user, it looks like it's a fluid movement. But on your end, you're just moving things ever so slightly between the different renders. So basically the way that you can think of Three.js is that you have something happening on a stage and you have objects that you want to change the look of by adding light or removing light. And you also have a camera that is looking at the stage and showing you what is happening. And you can move around the camera or so for example, right here, if I zoom out, I'm moving the camera further away. If I zoom in, I'm moving the camera closer. And so it's basically like a whole world within this canvas, and it's just what the camera is seeing. So yeah, hopefully that makes a bit of sense. If not, I'll pause right now for any questions in the Slido. We'd be super duper happy to answer. But if not, we can keep going. Okay, cool. It looks like we're good. Yeah. So now let's get into setup. Woo. Okay, so I want to quickly go over the tools that we'll be using because even though like the tools aren't the end all be all of things, it's so important to understand what you're using. So we'll be using React as the workshop entails, and then we'll be also using Three, which is the package for Three.js, and we'll be using React 3 Fiber, which is a tool to help connect React and Three.js, and we'll also be using something called Dre, which is three in German. The open source community was very gracious to create a lot of these materials, or a lot of open source repositories where we're able to like use the tools. So yeah, something to note is that when you're downloading the packages, whether using npm or yarn, to be downloading React like at react-3/fiber instead of at react-3 or instead of just react-3-fiber because that's like the older version. And there's a lot of things when it comes to compatibility that can go very wrong. So just like making sure that you have this part set up well. So yeah, I will be doing this as well. But before you download any packages, you have to set up your repository. So hopefully you have your text editor of choice up and that you have like the latest version of Node installed so that you're able to download things from npx or npm. So right now we'll be starting a new React app. So then in this case, hopefully you guys can see. Let me know if you can't. I'll zoom in a bit. Yeah, so npx, and then we'll do a create React app. And then let's call this spinning cubes. Yeah. So then adding that additional parameter will just change the name of things. Otherwise, you could just do create React app. So yeah, that's going to take a couple minutes. So we'll just go back to explaining a little bit as that builds. So yeah, just a quick reminder again, if this is annoying or if you run into any errors while you're installing this, use the starter code. It will save a lot of time and it'll actually allow you to follow along with the workshop. And I think that's really important because it's so hands-on. So yeah, I think when I'm learning things, it's really important for me to know why I'm doing certain things. So I'm going to explain 3 key decisions that I made and then try to like really help you guys also enter my brain to see like why this is the case. So you may be wondering why I'm using a JavaScript framework instead of just using like pure vanilla JavaScript, because like when it comes to Three.js, you can use just Three.js in JavaScript, or you can use it like with React and stuff like that. And I find that in terms of ease of use, it's just better to use React, because like if you're already making a React website for your portfolio, something like that, it's better to use better to use Three.js that is modified to be better suited to be compatible. So the way that I can show this for you guys is that I'll actually like paste some code as we wait for npm to install. So I'll just copy that real quick. Yeah, just so I can show you the difference between like classic Three.js and Three.js with three fiber. Okay. But before we do that, we will be entering into this folder, spinning cube, or yarn start, just to like see what is there in the app. And just like quickly going through the folder structure, you have your node modules here, which are different packages that you pull from online that help provide you with different tools. You have your source folder, which is mainly the things that you're going to be editing, specifically in the app.js here. And then you also have your public folder, which is all the computer generated code after you tell the source what to do. And then you have your package.json where you list all the different scripts and also the dependencies and the packages. And then you have the README, which is like kind of like a table of contents for your repo. And then your yarn lock, which is an auto-generated gigantic file of a whole bunch of information related to the packages that you're downloading. So we won't need to touch this. We won't touch this or this. The main thing that we're really going to be looking at is app.js here and the index.css, because that's how we want to change how things look. So as you can see here, you have like the default app running. So see if that changes, to see if that responds. And yes, it does. So we're going to start off by honestly just deleting a lot of this. We won't need this. So then that will be empty now. And to access the things that you'll be seeing, you can go to localhost 3000, which should be the default for React applications. Okay, so from here, I will go back to the slide of explaining. So when it comes to the JS framework versus vanilla JS, let me copy this. Let me paste this in. So just do this down here, just to show the example. Okay. If this looks scary right now, don't worry, I'll explain. But yeah, basically, this is what it would look like if you use vanilla Three.js. You would have to call on Three.js every time, and you have to create new things. And then you would have to create geometries and materials using this syntax. And then you would also have to set up a camera every single time. And then you would have to tell it to render every single frame. But with React, it kind of already does the things. So with React for Three.js, you don't need to set up the camera. You don't need to tell it when to re-render because React automatically does that. So that's two of the three hardest things in Three.js that you don't have to take care of. So then that's why we're using React 3 Fiber with it. And why React and not another language like Angular or Vue or other? Just finding that increasingly so in my personal job that I'm doing for this co-op and in the industry, it seems to be the standard for like a large amount of companies. And it's also in terms of ease of use and availability of resources to learn, I feel like React really comes on top there. But I'm not biased and I'm not like adamant about it in any way. Like you guys can definitely use Angular, Vue, or other. It's just that if you want to use React 3 Fiber, you do have to use React. And then we briefly went over why React 3 Fiber instead of React with Three.js, because it takes care of the camera and it takes care of the rendering. So from that point on, let's go over some of the basics of 3D modeling and just like 3D displaying things using Three.js. So the very, very basic thing that you have to do is set up the stage of where your objects are actually going to show up. So that we call it the canvas. And then it has the traditional Cartesian plane, or but then in like 3D. So then you have your X and your Y and your Z. So everything will basically be happening in this on this axis. So we can set that up now, or we can set that up soon after we go over a couple more important concepts. Another thing to be aware of is the camera. So the camera has basically its eyes on the canvas, and it's what you see on the screen. So if your camera was coming from directly above looking at the cylinder, you would see a circle. Or if your camera is looking on the side here, you would see a rectangle there. So that's like basics of the camera. There's different types, but this is what you need to know more or less for now. Yeah, so then we can set these up in the actual code for now. So we want to start off by setting up the canvas. And what we want to do there is, and we're going to be using the canvas from React 3 Fiber, which is a package that we'll be using. And in order to use it, we need to download it from online. So we're going to exit out of the app that's running right now, so that on your device, you can use like Control C, which usually works. And then now when you refresh the application, it's no longer running, so you won't be seeing it. So here you can use npm or yarn. I personally use yarn. And so you can type in yarn add, and then install the packages that you want to add. So the ones that we'll be using are 3 space. And then other ones, I get the exact name. Yeah, so then we want to use at React 3/Fiber. And you also want to do at React 3. So these are the only 3 that we'll be using. And instead of adding them individually every single time, you can add them all at once by having a space in between all of the names. If you were to use npm, then you could type it in like this, just npm I, and then list all of these names in your command line. Yeah, you can do it like that. But for now, we'll be using yarn. So we'll wait as that downloads in there. All right, I'll take this moment to check if there's any questions. Cool, it seems that we are good. All right, cool. So now if you go to package.json, just to check whether or not they're there, you can see that React 3 Dre, React 3 Fiber, and React are downloaded. If you're using the starter code on the code sandbox, I went ahead and already downloaded those for you in there so that you don't need to worry about that. And you can just code from there. And so now we can get it running again using yarn start. Yeah. And then just so that we're able to see things easily, we want to set up the index CSS as well. So, or the app CSS. So here we can kind of delete everything. We don't really need this. So we delete that in there. And there's some important information that we do want to add. So just want to select everything and make the sizing good. And then we want to make the HTML, the body, and the root. So basically, all the containers of the website to take up 100% of the screen. So we'll be doing right now. We'll be doing that right now as well. We'll make the height 100%, and we'll make the margin 0, and then we'll make the padding 0. So then that makes it makes the canvas fill up the entirety of the screen. Otherwise, we would have this only take up like 1/2 of the screen, but we want to take up the whole thing. And then we also want to make the background white so that we can see if anything comes up. Background. Cool. And I have like a fun little VS Code extension where you can like see the actual color of it. It's fun. Alrighty, so now let's go and let's set up the canvas. So in order to use the canvas, or we can delete this import because we're no longer using this. So we want to start by importing React because it's a React project. There you go. And then we also want to import Canvas, which is going to be what we use to set up the stage, essentially. And we're going to be importing this from @React 3 Fiber. There you go. All right, so nothing has changed here so far. You can't really see what has happened, but instead of doing a div here, we're going to change this to Canvas. And we're just going to put it in brackets because eventually this will be more than one line. So we'll do Canvas. And then it closes itself. Oh, here we go. Alrighty, so now the stage has been set up. You can't really see it right now, but you will in a bit, and it'll be really exciting. And in here, we talked about two things. We talked about the canvas and the camera, but like we mentioned before, React takes care of the camera part. React 3 Fiber takes care of the camera part for us. So we actually don't need to set this up, which is a huge win because camera having to deal with what's on the stage and where the camera is can get really finicky at a lot of points. So yay, this is something that we automatically avoid. But if you do want to get really creative with things and have like multi-cam shots of like where you're going to be placing it, you can use React 3 Dre to set up a couple custom cameras. But we won't be doing that right now, just for the sake of getting through this workshop. All right. So I guess aside from this, we want to start adding our shapes to this. So yeah, so we have objects here, and every object basically has a geometry and a material. The geometry is like the actual shape of the object, and the material is like a cloak that defines what it looks like or like what texture it has. So we can go to geometry. So basically, like you can have a cube, you can have your pyramids. If you want to get really creative with things, you can make a 3D model in like SolidWorks, or you can make it in SolidWorks, shout out to my engineers, or you can make it in like Blender, shout out to my artists, and you can import it into Three.js afterwards. And that's how you get these like really funky shapes. And then also you can have custom materials. So the one on the very left is a basic material. So it's just like very dull. It reflects light in a very like straightforward, consistent way. Whereas the one on the right, it's called Phong material. So it reflects light in a shiny way to make it look very bright and reflective. So there's actually a lot of different types of materials that you could possibly use, but we'll be focusing on these two for now for the sake of simplicity. So we'll be adding a geometry and materials to our canvas. So we can do this by adding a box geometry with a self-closing tag in there, and we want a mesh standard material. But something you may note is that now you just kind of have a geometry and you have a mesh you have a material kind of floating around. Here, you need to use a mesh to bind them together. Otherwise, the computer doesn't know what material you're trying to apply to what geometry. So now we just use mesh here, the lowercase mesh. Yeah. So then now, voila, you have your very first object on the screen. Kind of cool. So it's box geometry, which, as you can imagine, creates a box geometry and then creates the standard material on top. So the reason why it looks like a cube right now is because it looks like a square instead of a cube, is that you're looking at it directly faced on, and there's no depth to it right now because we haven't added lighting yet. So that's something to take note. And then I just wanted to show you guys something. If you were to do this exact same thing with vanilla Three.js instead of React 3 Fiber, it would look like this. There's a lot of code versus these four. So, because here you have to set up the camera and you have to set up rendering. So this is basically the entire part that we cut out by using just React 3 Fiber instead. So yeah, so now we have that set up, and I actually want to show you how you can customize the different shapes that you're putting in. So here you can put in different props with different arguments. So starts off like this, and then you can put an array of the depth, width, and height. So you want to do 2, 2, and 2, or 2, 2, and 2, and you save it. later, and then you change this to buffer, and then it'll change it. You can't quite see it right now because we changed them all consistently. Yeah. So I think we'll have to rotate it to see it, so we can do that a bit later on. So the reason why we added buffer here is because Three.js has two versions of the box, and there's box geometry or box buffer geometry. And the moment that you add the buffer in here, it gets a lot easier for your computer to render. So just for the sake of computational power and saving that and making it more efficient, you can just make it box geometry. All right. And then you can also change this to circle buffer geometry if you so feel like. And then now the thing that you pass in are corners instead, corners in size. So instead of depth, width, and height, it's like a radius of 2, and you have like 20 corners. Yeah. You can change the size here. But yeah, so you can change it from a circle to a box, basically. So let's change it back to the box. And then we can have 2, 2, 2. There you go. All right. Yeah, and then now we're going to be adding things to the material. So there's a lot of different things that you can add to it, but what we want to do is add the color. We change that to like maybe like. And the reason why you can't see it right now and it's just black is that we haven't actually given lighting to it yet. So that will be one of the next steps. So how exactly do you add lighting to this? We're actually going to go through a couple different types of light because there are plenty for us to talk about. So lights, yeah. So there's a point light that kind of goes in every single direction. There's a spotlight that kind of goes out like a cone. There's ambient light that is completely parallel to where you shine it. So depending on what type of effect you want and what you want to make it look like, there's these types of lights. And for different like 3D modeling stuff, the names for the lights also stay the same. So like point lights, no matter if you're using like Unity or some other game engine to make something, you can use the point light for this as well, which is pretty cool. So we'll be adding those lights now. Yeah, so if your box is here, you want to be adding it on top. So we're going to be adding ambient light, and then we can change the intensity of it by specifying like maybe like 0.3. We don't want to make it that. So then now you can start to see that blue color come to life. And then there's also like a couple different types of light that you can add. And usually what people like to do in Three.js is definitely to stack them because it just makes things look a little bit more realistic. So we can do the directional light next. Yeah, and then with the directional light, we'll have to choose a specific position for it. So we'll be doing that now. So let's just say we want to put it like 0, 10, and then these will be coordinate points basically. And we want to modify the intensity of how much the light is. So we want to make this one a little bit more intense. So then we can make this 1.5 instead. So at this point, you can literally put any number work. But yeah, so this will be, it's a little bit brighter than it was before. Alrighty, so then now we can add a couple point lights to maybe get like reflections in different directions and stuff like that. So we have a point light. And we actually want two so that they're like coming from both sides. So we do -10 and just bring it over to that side a little bit more. 20. And then we can also make the intensity different. Make this one like 0.5. And then we'll do a second point light, but instead we'll make it a little bit more intense and we'll also have it coming from a different place. So now we have a box floating in the middle of space. You should give yourselves a pat on the back. We are halfway through the workshop. It speeds up and it gets pretty cool pretty quickly once we add in like the animations and the movements and stuff like that. But yeah, cool. So now we're actually going to be adding in a bit of a different material, so changing it from the standard to the thong, so that it gets a little bit more reflective. Yeah, so all of these things like you'll start to see a little bit more once the movement kicks in. And then with thong, in addition to the color blue, you can also change the level of shininess. So then you can make shininess, and let's just make it 100. Yeah, so you'll see that in a bit. Alrighty, so I'm just gonna grab a drink of water. All right, so we can actually take this box and we can reuse it a couple times if we want to have two boxes like in the final example. So we can actually do that by abstracting all of this out, or abstracting this out into another component so that you're able to reuse it and create multiple. So just like any other component in React, you can start off by creating another function and passing the props because there's information that we want to pass along, and then we can return the JSX of the box. So yeah, instead of having this in here, we'll be moving it a little bit. All right, so now it's disappeared because we've removed it from the app, but we can add it back by having a box. Yeah, so now it is back. Cool. And then something that we also do want to prep now is allow ourselves to pass in information from the props. I'll explain what this means in a little bit. So basically, any other information that we pass in here, it is sent in here as well. So say, theoretically, we want to change the position of where this box sits. So we want to change the position to be a little bit more to the left. -1, 0. So we move it off to the side a little bit. And now you can kind of start to see the 3D bits because it's not directly in front of the camera. So say you want to repeat this box twice. You want to repeat it off to the other side. Now, you got two boxes. So if you want to go really ham and create all the boxes to your heart's desire, or just make like a really long box. But for now, we'll just be working with the two boxes here. Cool. So we will be doing that. Alrighty. So I'm just gonna really quickly change the color of this box to match the final version. So instead of blue, we'll change that to this color. Yeah. And you might be noticing here that it's like how come this type of red doesn't look exactly like this pixel would? Because this pink is a lot more vibrant of a pink. So something that you're able to use is something called color management that helps correct it to make the colors a little bit more true to life. So you can do that right in here. Yeah, and that updates it ever so slightly. Cool. So now that we have the actual boxes, we can start to make it move. So something that we want to do now is to add animations by using hooks. So something that we can do now is import a couple of helper functions or help. So one of the hooks that we'll be using is useRef. And another one from here is called useFrame. So just take a moment to import those really quickly. All right, so one of the good things about using React for this is that you kind of separate the things that you see and the logic of how it moves and how it interacts with the user. So that's exactly what we're doing now. So we probably won't be touching this as much. We'll be adding some more movement up here in this separate section. So we can start off by, we want to be able to call on the specific box. And the way that we do that is by using useRef. So we're just going to set that up right now, which is const mesh. This is so we know what exactly we're trying to animate here. That's going to be the first thing that we do. Cool. So as you guys might remember from before, you're constantly re-rendering and then re-uploading basically a new state of events to the website so that you're kind of able to get that like stop motion effect of like having incremental movements look like a smooth movement to the human eye later on. So we're going to do that right now. So the use frame function is basically saying that every single frame this thing happens. So let's use the frame now. And before we do that, we just want to, this is referring to something and we want it to know that it is referring to this specifically. Yeah, so basically this refers to that now, and these two are now connected. So now anything that we do in terms of animations will affect this exact object. Yeah, so now we're going to use it. We're just going to use the arrow notation because it's a constant loop that always happens. So it's not waiting for any particular event to occur for this to run, it just always runs. And basically what we're going to say is mesh.call. So here we're going to be looking at the rotation of the specific box object, and then we're going to make it equal to the rotation of the y. And the thing is that we want to change it every single time. So every single frame, we're going to increment it ever so slightly with 0.1. So yeah, so I think this will really happen. I will be fixing it. Oh. Cool. All right. So just a quick refresh there. Something that usually happens with React is that it might not always refresh at first go. So just press Command R or Control R, and then it'll refresh. And if you saved it in your text editor, then it'll refresh entirely. So look, now they're moving. Kind of cool. If you want to get really funky with movements, I also was tinkering around and I created this on the side here. So you don't have to use this one. You can keep the animation as is, but you can integrate the position with like sine and like other math functions. So like make it move in a wave if you so choose. So this is kind of what happened here. So yeah, you're just taking the time divided by 2 or times 2, and then you divide it by 100, and then it just like creates really interesting movements, and I think it's super cool. Or you can, if you want to make the movement really drastic, you can change the values and it'll go kind of crazy. I don't know if we want that right now, so we'll change it back to smooth and calm. But it's really fun to play around with, really cool to see. And another thing is that we want it to know whenever we're interacting with it. So as of right now, when we hover over the box, nothing happens, it doesn't get bigger, and it doesn't change color. So what we want to do is for it to know, for the state to change when every time we're hovering over it. So for this, we can use use state. So we'll just add that here. It's a commonly used React hook. If you ever find yourself needing to know more about React hooks, my friend, or not really friend, okay, my friend and I, we did a workshop about React. And if you want to learn more about hooks, then feel free to watch that one. I think it's available on YouTube and you can learn more about it. But for now, we will just be using use state. There you go. And then from there, we want to add the hook into the box function as well. So right below here, we can do const, and then we can use the spread syntax of to set up the state. Yeah, so this is just like React hook syntax. If you feel like it's unfamiliar, then yeah, just feel free to to like look at the official documentation. It's pretty well written. So we're going to be creating something called is hovered. And we can also create, I was originally going to do two, but we'll just do one for now. So is hovered, and we'll say that as initially false. Yeah, so this doesn't do anything right now because we haven't set it up to interact with anything, but we want to create a basically a function that every time the pointer is over this specific item, then it changes this state. So it will change is hovered to true instead. So we'll do that inside of mesh. So we'll do that here. So mesh has something built in called on pointer over. And then we can do that to do a callback. Let's set that to true. And we'll refresh that. So you can't really see anything here so far, but it does change it to true. And just so that you're able to see that really quickly, we'll create a ternary operator that is dependent on whether or not this value is true in the color right here. So we'll do is hovered, so it checks if this is hovered or not, and if it is, then it'll be a different color. I'll just copy the exact hex code in here. Yeah, so now we're checking that if the state is hovered, then we're going to make it a purple. And if not, then we're just going to make it pink. So now we have the color change. But the thing is, it doesn't change back once you hover off over. So we're going to add this additional thing. So on pointer over, this is when it's directly hovering over. We're going to do the exact same thing, but for on pointer off. Which in this case is called on pointer up. We just copy and paste the exact same thing, and is hovering equals false. Now, if we refresh this, once we hover over top, it'll turn purple, and once we hover off, it will turn back to pink. So that's exciting. Now you've gotten the color to change and to actually interact with when you are moving and touching the box. And then the last thing we'll do here is we'll change the size. So something that you're able to add to this mesh is you're able to change the size of it using a prop called scale. So this is how you change the size of things. And much like what we're doing in here, state is hovered. Originally, you would just input in the array of values. So we want to make it like 1, 1, 1, that's the default, so you can't really see the difference here. But if you want to make it dependent on the state, when it's hovered, do that. You want to make it slightly bigger, maybe like 1.5 times the size. Now, every time you hover over top, it gets bigger. It's a little bit chunkier. All right, so now you've actually gotten movement to happen. You've got the object to be able to move, and you've got it to change every time you interact with it. Not only the color, but also the size. I think that's pretty exciting. So now I'm going to take a break to check out if there's any questions. All right. Wow. So you guys are doing good. Cool. So if we compare this to the example that we also have the movement, we also have the change of colors, but we don't have the plane at the very bottom, which resembles the floor, and we also don't have the sky. So we're going to add that next. Okay, so we got movements, and now let's go to extra. All right, so you can think of the floor or the plane at the very bottom as kind of like another object that you need to set up the geometry for and that you need to add the mesh on as well. So something that we can do there is kind of replicate a similar structure as what we have here. So here you have the mesh that contains the geometry and the material. So we'll do that here as well. So we'll do mesh here, and then it'll contain the geometry. So instead of a cube in this case, we're going to be making a plane. So it's called plane buffer geometry. And we also want to add the material. We'll just make it nice and plain for now. So we'll go mesh standard material. So if you compare that to what's happening here, it's a pretty similar structure. You got your geometry and you got your material, and you got your geometry and you got your material. So you save this, and it's just like a funky little square that like kind of resembles a plane. Nothing super exciting right now, and that's because we need to put in the props to specify the size. So the arguments, we want to make this a really big plane because we want to make like a gigantic floor, right? So we'll be doing that next. Args, it takes in the arguments, I think it's like length and width. We'll be making that maybe like 100 by 100. Now it's a really big floor. You can't really see the ends of it, and you can see the cubes kind of disappearing into the corners there, and it's kind of eating it. But that's not exactly what we want. We kind of want to be able to rotate it a little bit, so that it's not like 90 degrees and like blocking off the rest of the screen. So we can actually rotate the entire material here. I'll do that rotation. Okay. And here's when we use a little bit of math as well. So we'll do math pi. We'll divide that by 2, 0. And we'll use the position, 0, and -3. Cool. So basically what we did here is that we decreased where it is at. We basically brought the floor down a bit on the y-axis so that it's a little bit lower. We can bring it even lower if you want to. We can make it like -15. And then it'll be even further away, which is something. Another, I guess, like tip for Three.js related things is that every time you don't know what something does, put in like a really big number and then you can watch it change and then you'll know what it does. And that's exactly what we did here. We went from -3 to -15, and now we know what this does. It changes where the plane sits on the y-axis. And then here we also rotated the plane so that it is on the ground instead. And maybe we want to change the color a bit. Maybe we want to make it like blue. All right, so we'll do color equals blue. Now it's like a purplish blue because colors are a little bit different. We want to make this light blue just so it fits a little bit more. Now it's like a little bit of a grayish blue. Cool. So in this case, now that we have the plain floor, we want to start introducing Dre really quickly. So I think we might run like 5 minutes over. So hopefully that's okay with you guys. But here we're going to be importing some additional things so we can make the sky and we can also make it move around. So yeah, so we'll be importing the sky right now. And the sky has a sun, and it tells us to specify a few things called the azimuth and the inclination. Don't be scared of these names. Like, I know it's kind of like terrifying to think about, but like once you put it in, and we can like play around with the numbers so that you can get familiar with how changing the props and the parameters can impact the end result. So if we want to get a sky, which is actually like a built-in function of React 3 Dre, we can just go forth and import it. So we can just import sky. And because it's not the default import, you have to put it within the curly brackets from React 3 Dre. Yeah, so now we can import the sky. And then we can just add that at the very bottom here. Sky and distance, we want to make it really, really far away. So let's put in this arbitrary number. And then the sun position, here's the X, Y, Z coordinates that you can put in as well. So we want it to be like directly above. So we'll do 0, 1, 0. And then Just some other numbers. Inclination. So the angle at which you're looking at it, we just want it to be dead on there as well. And then the azimuth, which we saw in the diagram. It's a fancy name. You can look more in detail of the specifics later on, but we'll just put this in now for the sake of time. So after putting in all these values and refreshing the page, it calls on the imports in here, and now you can see that you have a sky of sorts. But what if you want to like rotate and be able to like see what happens in the places around you? Well, luckily for us in React 3.js, which is like a very helpful library, they have this thing called orbital controls. So we can actually import that right now and add that to the very end of the document. Orbit controls. So then you can use your cursor to navigate where you are. So we'll just add that at the very end here, or bit controls. And once you add that in, you're able to drag this around and move, and you can zoom in and you can zoom out. And now you have a better perspective of how things are and what they move like. And you can also see the sun at the very, very top there as well. And if you want to go forth and change some things, like the azimuth, you change it to like 0.5, that'll likely change where the sun is. Or if you want to change the inclination at all, change. Yeah, that'll also change where the angle of the sun is in context with everything else. But yeah, so now you have your floating cubes with your floor. As you can see, we only made the plane 100 by 100. So if you zoom out far enough, you can see the ends of the plane. But for now, you can see that there's a floor there. You can touch it, you can hover over it, you can see the sky, and you can navigate around. So at this point, you've basically made this example. So congratulations on making your first Three.js mini application. Kind of exciting. So now we'll go into really quickly some do's and don'ts of React and Three.js, so that you have some like kicking off points for a little bit more exploration. So stuff that you should do. We didn't do it much in this time around, but if you're really struggling and something's not working, definitely check the browser console for more error messages, because they were really good to build those in pretty effectively. So if you just like inspect source with everything, or if you console log things, because you are working with React, you're able to see that, and it's able to like give you alerts or some privy into the things that are doing wrong or things that you're doing right. Something also is to set the background to something other than black. So what we saw is like when we first set up the cube, it was just like a black square. And if your background is black, you can't see it. So just make sure that you set it to like white or something else. And a mistake that I've made like far too often is when you make something and you set up everything perfectly with the colors and the shapes and the corners and everything, and you just like don't have light on it. So you just like don't see anything. So make sure that that isn't a problem that you run into as well. Always make sure your light is pointing in the right direction and illuminating the object. And then also, if you find that your shiny material is not working, just try it with mesh basic material, and then it'll give you some details into whether or not the material is binding to the geometry properly. And then also make sure things are always within the view of the camera. For example, if you just like tilt, or if you like zoom things out really far, and then you're like, why can't I see my cubes? It's because it's like not really in the frame of the camera. So just like making sure that you're facing the camera in the right direction if you decide to do any custom camera stuff, and otherwise that's pretty important too. And then I guess like another thing is to watch out for outdated answers on Stack Overflow. I think Three.js might be older than some of the people watching this workshop right now, and that's kind of nuts. But yeah, it's like been around for a while. So if you have answers and you see it on there and they're like 5 years old, maybe, just maybe, there's a chance that it might not be the answer for you. So try to dig for more recent things, or to ask someone that has more like recent experience, stuff like that. And for all the Americans out there, I'm sorry, but everything that you do in Three.js is in SI units. So in your meters, in your definitely probably not going to work with liters in this, but like generally think meters, think just metric system for all of this. Yeah. And stuff that you shouldn't do, don't neglect learning Three.js. React 3 Fiber is a really helpful tool for us to be able to use Three.js really easily. But if you want to go back and learn Three.js as well, I highly recommend it, because it gives you a lot of details into like how to actually use React 3 Fiber as well. And definitely don't give up. It can get a little frustrating sometimes, but I assure you, it'll be definitely worth it. And aside from that, there's also some things that you can do as well. So I talked a little bit about like being able to import your own custom 3D models, which I think is really cool. And there's also a whole bunch of different plugins from the community. So GLTFs are like the 3D model, like the file type. So there's an easy way to import that if you want to use that in your projects. You can also use it for like VR and AR. You can imagine just like with this box and stuff like that. Like, what if you like put on an Oculus and you can interact with it? And there's some tools there that makes it pretty easy for you. There's also like physics engines and stuff like that. If you want to like make your 3D blocks collide with each other, you can do that as well. And say like you're looking at our example and you don't like how the movement is like super duper rigid and it changes from one state to another. React Spring is really good for kind of making movements flow into each other, so it looks like a springing animation instead of just like on and off. And yeah, there's like a whole bunch of different things that you can use. I just put Moore's law because it's like if it's an open source thing, there's probably more tools available for you to explore and to use. And yeah, you can like import in your own 3D models. You can create your own custom shaders. Which is basically like how your object interacts with light. So if you want to make it shiny, if you want to make it grainy, if you want to make it textured, like these are all things that you can do. Um, and yeah, there's a lot of possibility out there, and I really hope that you guys get it as excited and like willing. You're as willing to explore as I am. And thank you for listening to my workshop. And I hope you guys have a great Gear Up and a great Hack the North. Yeah, so hope you guys have a great evening, and I will hopefully see you guys soon. And yeah, definitely fill in the feedback survey. We'd love to hear from you guys of what I can do better. And that's basically wrapping up for me. So see you guys. Bye.